producer from NFL Films, Greg Cosell, also co-host of the ESPN NFL Matchup Show, where they are going to be doing an in-depth segment, Steve, on one Jonathan Taylor. Greg, how deep in the weeds do you get on Jonathan Taylor with that segment?
Well, yeah, I actually do a piece on two of his zone runs. He's a predominant zone runner. That's the foundation of their run game. So he's been running pretty well. They have their offense starts pretty much with the run game. Should be a good matchup. You know, the Bills have a good run D. I think the Colts have to stay pretty committed to the run game unless the score suggests otherwise.
Phillip Rivers.
What's that?
How has the Colts offense changed with Phillip Rivers out and Carson Wentz in?
Well, I don't think it's changed dramatically because if you go back to last year down the stretch, particularly Steve, the last 6, 7, 8 games, they were a run first team. Taylor, I think if you look at his numbers from that stretch, was carrying the ball on average probably about 20 times. I think the pass game might be a little different, but I think the foundation of what they're trying to get done is probably somewhat similar. Taylor, obviously right now he's been getting, I don't know what his average number of carries per game is, but it's clear that's the foundation. The interesting thing that they do is they actually line up in a meaningful number of snaps every week with both Taylor and Nyheim Hines on the field at the same time in what many call a pony package. And that's been pretty effective as well because Hines is kind of a movement player who can line up in all different positions, different areas in the formation. And it'll be curious to see, well, I guess from the Bills' perspective, it doesn't matter. I was going to say how teams match up, but we know what the Bills are going to do. They're going to play nickel. The Bills would play nickel probably if a team lined up with 8 tight ends.
Right. Yeah, and I think Taylor carries it about 19 times a game.
Actually, it's 16. He's got 161 carries in 10 games. So
there
16
you go. 16
times a game.
game. So it strikes me that this game is a rematch of the wild card game as we've been talking about, but also you got a Colts team that is dug out of a deep hole, won 5 of their last 7. And it seems, and we had Stephen Holder on who covers the Colts for ESPN. This is a team that really used the first month of the season to find out who it was because Carson Wentz was hurt, Quentin Nelson was hurt, a couple of their key players were hurt and couldn't play. They were finding out they didn't have a preseason with those guys, and it took them a while to find themselves, and they lost games because of it. Is that right?
Well, I think that's fair because keep in mind, even though Frank Reich knew Carson Wentz from Philadelphia, I think it's pretty fair to say that based on 2020 tape that Carson Wentz was somewhat of a broken player. And they needed to find out what he could be and what he could get to. And without having much of a training camp due to the foot injury, they really didn't know that. So they had to use the first part of the season to find out what Wentz is. And I think he's settled in pretty well. I think they do a lot of play action. He's been very effective in the conventional play action pass game, meaning under center. I think for the most part, he's thrown the ball well. I think it's in his DNA, guys, that every once in a while he's going to make one of those plays that you shake your head. But he's not turning the ball over for the most part, and he's not getting sacked a lot, which was a major issue in Philadelphia. So I think you'd have to say that he's played well, not at the level of 2017 when many thought he was on his way to being a top 2 or 3 quarterback in the league. But you can line up and play with Carson Wentz, and he can make every throw, and he has enough movement to make plays. I'm sure you saw last week when that game against Jacksonville seemed to be in the balance a little bit. He made that second reaction movement throw running to his right with about 3 minutes to go to hit Michael Pittman, I think for about 25, 28 yards. And here we're watching Jonathan Taylor, who is very good, by the way, in the screen game as well as we're looking at. So they had to find out what Carson Wentz was and is, and he's played pretty consistently through the first. What is their record now? They've won
5-5.
Yeah, so they played 10 games. He's played pretty well through the 10 games.
Michael Pittman has effectively become their number one receiver. He's kind of supplanted T.Y. Hilton for that role. And he also leads the league in third down receptions. I don't know if you cut it this fine, Greg, but how have they made use of him on third downs? I realize the distance to gain factors
Sure.
into what play they're going to call, but what predominantly have they used Pittman on to get him the ball on that crucial down?
Yeah, Pittman is an intriguing player because he's big, he's physical. They like to use him quite a bit on crossers, shallow crossers, depending on the distance on third down. With that big body, he can run away from people because he has good speed and he can use his body. But again, I can't think of every kind of play, but Pittman is clearly their number one guy. I mean, I guess he's had over 20 catches on third down, which is quite a bit actually, given
21,
his total number of catches. Yeah. But he's a big body. He's a tough cover. I remember watching him coming out of college, and I thought he fit the profile of a boundary X perfectly, because those guys often get man coverage. They get individual routes because often it's on the backside of trips and the coverage is more focused on 3 wide receivers. So you get a lot of man and you can get a lot of individual routes, isolation routes. He's equipped to do all that. And I think that, he'll continue to get better as Wentz settles in, gets more comfortable, as the offense settles in and gets more comfortable.
And we talked about this at length. What did the Bills, when they played the Jets this last week, and we're trying to figure out what might the Bills do offensively going forward, particularly with an offensive line that's being shuffled again. Under center last week against the Jets came out of nowhere for a lot of people. They went from being 90% shotgun to under center like 70% of the time. And certainly it had to catch the Jets off guard. But what did that do? And can you see it being a big factor going forward?
Well, that's obviously the question. I guess we don't know the answer to that, but turning on that tape and then all of a sudden seeing Josh Allen under center, Gilliam playing, 15 snaps, I believe, 2 tight ends playing 12 or 13 snaps, something along those lines. It looked like a philosophical change in their approach. They tried to run the ball more, obviously, out of, with Josh under center. We'll see if that continues. Obviously, it got them back on track. Many will say they beat a bad team. And obviously, the Jets over the last month have been historically bad on defense. But I don't think that's relevant to what the Bills are trying to get done. They needed to sort of get back on track. They thought that was the best way. I'm sure there were a lot of conversations early in the week after the Jacksonville loss, with the coaching staff and players. How do we want to go forward? Because there has been a little inconsistency in their offense this year. And as we've discussed, as good as Josh Allen is, it's just hard to put your quarterback in the shotgun and pretty much run your offense that way. Particularly, the other factor is the O-line. The O-line's had a lot of shuffling. It's not a great pass protection O-line. It's just too difficult to ask them to pass protect 40, 45 times with the quarterback in the gun. You need the run game element. You need the ability to move forward and be proactive as opposed to reactive. So I would think, I don't know if you'll see it as much, guys, but I think it'll start to become a meaningful part of what they do.
And not just going off of last week's game, but where do you come down on Brian Dabol on the creativity meter in terms of being willing to turn to things like this to get his offense right?
Well, I think it's a positive. Whether you're there, I'm not. I don't know whether it was his call or meetings with Sean and, hey, we got to change some stuff. I can't answer that, but I think that first of all, the run game, you can do more in the run game with the quarterback under center. You can do more in the play action pass game with the quarterback under center. And I'm talking about how it impacts the defense as well. I think that I would hope you'd see more of it. They were having a big issue getting the ball down the field. Last year, they made far more big explosive chunk plays in the pass game than they had made this year. Now, I don't know what the number is, but just watching the tape, it did not seem like they were making as many big plays in the pass game, and they need to find a way to do that. And I think going with Josh under center with the play action pass game, and I think his play action numbers were pretty much off the charts this week.
Right.
I'm sure I think I remember looking them up and then seeing it was
305 yards off play action.
Right, but I think when he was under center, I think he was 11 for 14 for 192 yards.
Right.
And prior to the Bills game, not the Bills game, to the Jets game, excuse me, he only had 32 pass attempts under center, and that was in 8 games. So this was a big change. I just think you can do more things. So we'll see. I know they want to keep running the ball and have it be a viable part of their offense.
Well, their front is gonna be working against a defensive D line for the Colts. It's getting better. Kwity Paye's playing better. Odeyingbo is playing better. DeForest Buckner's always a force. He's got 4.5 sacks, 45 tackles. Talk about the front of the Colts defense and what it might be looking at with a Bills offensive front in the shape it's in.
Yeah, and Steve, that's a great point because the Colts have a good front and they have a lot of depth and position versatility along their D line. Odeyingbo, who came out of Vanderbilt, he got hurt in his last year in college, but I really liked his tape. He is a big kid, long arms, athletic. He's in a center place, Tyquan Lewis, who's out for the year, and he can play D end, he can play D tackle. They move people around. They've got a lot of players who are capable. Muhammad can rush the quarterback. Toure can rush the quarterback, and he's also lined up inside as well. You mentioned Buckner. Obviously, he's a big-time player. Grover Stewart's a really good one-technique player who normally doesn't play in their sub-fronts unless it's first down, but he's a really good run defender. So, they've got a lot of players. You mentioned Paye. I thought he really flashed last week as an edge pass rusher working from both sides. He's one of those guys that has the ability to initiate and then play off contact effectively with hand usage and leverage and strength. That's more of his game than just pure speed. But they're pretty deep on the front. It's the back end where they've struggled this year and had a lot of injuries.
Right. And then looking at their secondary, Greg, I'm having a tough time figuring them out, especially looking at the numbers. We know they're without their top 2 safeties. Both of them are on IR.
Yeah.
So they've got veterans back there in George Odom and Andrew Sendejo, and their corners have had problems preventing big plays. I mean, they've given up 23 passing touchdowns. That's the most in football through 10 games.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, they're a team that is big on takeaways, more from fumbles than interceptions, but still, I'm trying to figure out which secondary is showing up on Sunday to play the Bills.
Yeah, well, takeaways are an odd thing, but in terms of talent, they got Rock Ya-Sin back, I think, last week. He's been up and down. He played well last week against the Jaguars, but he's been up and down in his career. Obviously, Kenny Moore, he's one of the best slot corners in the league, so they're fine there. But as far as other corners, it's been a little bit of a struggle for them. Carey's been around the league. TJ Carey's been with a number of teams. You can line him up and play. He played outside. Rodgers played outside opposite Ya-Sin. So they've been searching. I think Rhodes is due to play this week, is he not?
Yes. Yeah.
So, but I don't think he's the same player that he was.
No, he's got a high passer rating against. It's like 146.8 on deep balls. It's crazy.
Yeah, so this is a very beatable secondary. Where they are good, of course, is their 2 nickel linebackers, Leonard and Okereke, are really, really good players. So that's where they are very good. But the back end, you're talking about the safeties. Sendejo, whenever they went to a single high, it was almost always Sendejo. And then they played Odom. They played some veterans who've been around. They played Jaleel Adai, who I think's been playing since 1975. And then they had Josh Jones, who actually came out of North Carolina State as a high-level traits guy, size, speed, movement, and it just hasn't worked out. But he's there now. So both Adai and Jones played snaps at safety with Sendejo last week because Sendejo played every snap.
What is the common denominator with the offenses that have had real success against the Colts? What do they do well consistently and the Colts really struggle with?
To give you the Cliff Notes version, Steve, throwing the ball. Teams have had success throwing the ball against this Colts defense because their secondary has been problematic. They They feature three main coverage concepts. Cover one, which is, of course, man coverage with a single high safety. They play a good amount of cover two, and they play a good amount of cover three, which is the zone version with a single high safety. Now, they'll mix in some cover four, and they'll play some one robber, depending on the situation. But for the most part, they play three main coverage concepts. They really will have to rely on their pass rush. They'll blitz on occasion. Kenny Moore is a really good blitzer from the slot. One thing they do is they will green dog. So if they play man and the back stays in, the linebacker, whether it's Okereke or Leonard, who has the back man in man coverage, if the back stays in to protect, that guy shoots and adds into the rush. He doesn't just stand there and cover grass.
But as you said, they're not a high blitz rate team generally.
Not relative to the league. Correct.
Yeah. Right.
So, you see their pass rush is kind of gaining some traction.
Yeah, I do.
The Bills are going to have a shuffled offensive line. And the last time they had that line, Jacksonville got home early and often just rushing 4. So,
yes.
What might be some solutions for the Bills? They went to some more 12 personnel last week, and that helped in terms of holding up the protection. I'm curious what their solutions might be going forward. I didn't know if you had any theories or things might be able to turn to there.
That's where I think you should see more Josh under center and the pass game working that way. Because think of it this way. Everybody always assumes that play action just impacts second-level defenders, meaning linebackers. But if you run outside zone play action, run action, which, of course, outside zone is a part of the Bills' run game, think about the impact on the defensive line. Their first move is lateral as opposed to vertical, rushing the quarterback. That helps your pass protection. So I think you're going to see more of Josh under center with the conventional play action pass game. I really do. And I think you should. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say I'm smarter than Sean or Brian Dabol, but I think that it's a good way to help an offensive line that's again being shuffled, which is a shame because I thought Spencer Brown played pretty well last week. He's really athletic, for a guy that size, but he's obviously out this week. So, I think that the play action pass game is really important. And I think I'd like to think we'll see more of it.
Right. And as this game gets closer and closer and these lineups it's a shuffled secondary for Indianapolis versus a shuffled offensive line for the Bills. And, the COVID and the injuries for both clubs, who's going to be up and who's going to be down. Darius Leonard's struggling with an ankle. He's been dragging around with a couple weeks, left the game last week for a minute, came back in.
And what's Edmonds' status for this week?
Up in the air. He's limited today.
He practiced it on a limited basis today. So we're anticipating like a questionable designation, but we're just guessing.
Here's the problem, Greg, because if they play him Sunday, if he's healthy enough, okay, that's fine if he's healthy enough, but he's not, is he going to get good enough in 3 days to play Thursday as well? The 2 games in 4 days is kind of an issue, I think, for anybody with an injury for the Bills as to whether they're going to be healthy or not, and the COVID guys in particular.
Yeah. Do they have guys? The Bills have guys on the COVID list?
Yeah, Spencer Brown and Starlo Tulele.
Oh, okay. That's right, Brown. I saw that. I didn't know about Latulele. So neither one is playing Sunday, right?
We don't know definitively, but it would seem to be headed in that direction.
Right. Yeah, the one advantage they have is they have A.J. Klein, because A.J. Klein can line up and play. A lot of teams have a major drop-off when you lose a player like Edmonds if he can't go. Obviously, Klein's not the same player, but you can line up and play with A.J. Klein.
All right. Listen, Greg, thanks very much. We look forward to seeing that Jonathan Taylor piece on the NFL matchup show on ESPN.
It's okay, Chris. You can say you don't really are looking that much forward to it since it's not on the on the Bills.
Well, that's okay. I kind of want to know what they're in for. To be quite honest with you,
Taylor's really a good back. He was my number one runner coming out 2 years ago when he came out, and I think that's proven to be the case.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks as always, Greg, for the insight. We'll look forward to talking to you next week.
All right, guys. Appreciate it. Thanks.